Okay, welcome everyone. It's Friday, it's Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day to those of you that care. Uh, Anyway, today we're excited to take a look at a couple bills, but let's go ahead and take roll before we do.
Absolutely, Madam Chairman. For February 14th, Senate Education, Senator Brennan,
Excused?
Senator Olson,
Here.
Senator Rothfuss, Senator Scott,
Here.
Chairwoman Schuler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to go ahead and start with House Bill 316, School Finance Model Recalibration 2. We're excited to have two real experts in the room. I'll let you guys introduce yourself for the record.
Certainly, Madam Chairwoman, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office Operations Administrator.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Matthew Wilmarth, LSO Senior School Finance Analyst.
Welcome, and tell us what you want us to know.
Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, this bill comes to you from Management Council, and it establishes a select recalibration committee comprised of 6 members on each side of the House, with one of those members being from the minority party. All the members are appointed by the Speaker of the House for his side, and then the President of the Senate for that side of the House. It charges this committee with recalibrating the Education Resource Block Grant model. This is a statutory responsibility as well as a constitutional charge out of the Campbell cases, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Those appointments are required to be made by March 31st of 2025. And it also requires the leadership to appoint the co-chairman, one from each house. It mandates state agencies, school districts, the school district or school data advisory committee to provide necessary data and information to LSO and our consultants for purposes of conducting this effort. And it appropriates $920,000 to LSO for professional consulting expertise and the expenses of the committee. Subject to your questions, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee.
Questions? Ms. Heitrick? Yeah, I just have one. When I first read through the bill, 920,000, my eyes, kind of popped out of my head. Yeah, and I don't realize, I don't remember how long this process takes. Is that fairly constant for consultants? I mean, a fairly constant amount, I guess.
Madam Chairwoman, it is, and it includes amounts for the committee, and this committee will meet approximately 12 meeting days over the course of the interim. And we've also talked to leadership about a school finance school for members to sort of kick off this effort to set a baseline for background information, foundational knowledge, the Campbell cases, what your charge is, how the model operates currently, what that looks like. Many members probably aren't familiar with the many spreadsheets that Matt maintains.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, go ahead, Senator Scott.
What's the process for selecting the consultants?
Go ahead, Ms. Heitrick.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator, we would work with Management Council to undertake that effort. They would determine whether they wanted to release an RFP or whether they would like to continue with our current consultant, which is a possibility. I would note Management Council approved in November for Dr. Pikus and Alan Oden to conduct a desk audit, and that effort will be complete in April. And as part of that legislative school that I mentioned, our intention is to bring Dr. Pikus out to speak to the select committee and other interested members about that effort.
Okay. Other questions? Just to follow up on that, I think that particular group has been used for what, 2 or 3 times, is that correct?
Madam Chairwoman, they conducted the 2005 recalibration, but I would note that even prior to that, Dr. Pikus was involved with MAP, who was really the first company to create what we thought was a cost-based model, similar to what you see today, but it's much more nuanced today than 25 years ago.
Other questions? Again, just to follow up on the appointments, they've got to be done here fairly soon. And that committee, it talks a little bit about the vacancies, how they're taken care of and that sort of thing. the agencies that are required to collect the information, has there ever been an issue in the past with not getting the data and the information you need?
Madam Chair, no. Generally, the expenditure and revenue data that the Department of Education currently collects from the school districts is a routine collection. It's been collected in a standardized format for well plus over 30 years. There are instances where the select committee will have one-off collections throughout the process. Such items as school resource officers, that is not a component currently within your school finance system, but school districts do employ school resource officers. So that might be an area of exploration that the committee wants information on, and school districts are very responsive to that, those types of data requests.
I would note, Madam Chairwoman, one side note with that too is that the prior bill drafts have contained, the prior laws charging this effort have contained that same language, and it does provide your staff with the ability to cite to a law to get that information. So would it have been a problem had that not existed? Probably not, but it's always good to cite to a law.
Great. Senator Scott?
Am I right in thinking that most of what's done is based on what's actually being spent now? That, because I remember when we first went to this model, there was a very high correlation between the relative spending in the districts before and after the Campbell decision. The spending went up, but it went up pretty uniformly, and there was a very high correlation.
Mr. Wilmarth, go ahead.
Madam Chair and Senator Scott, the model is generally not based upon school district expenditures per se. Some components have looked at historical expenditures such as utilities, but the consultants generally do not base the prices of the components on school district historical expenditures. However, when we analyze in years between recalibrations or even during the recalibration, we do compare certain components and what school districts expend within those components as part of the Department of Education's continued review of educational resources report, or what's referred to as a CREW report. We have historically, since the 2005 recalibration, set up a process that monitors the expenditures of components to school districts' expenditures. And so that is an analysis that the legislature enacted, I believe in the 2008 or 2009 timeframe. But we don't base majority of the components on those historical expenditures, but we do through our monitoring process in years between recalibrations, and we bring that to the education and appropriations committees, we do compare those expenditures against the model allocations.
Follow-up, are you good? Just a question I had on how, particularly with inflation, as important as it's been, and it's here, and then it's here, and it's here, how heavily does that work into the finance model?
Madam Chair, the process for adjusting your prices in the model for inflation is done through your external cost adjustment analysis. And you may recall last week when you discussed the budget, there was an external cost adjustment in Agency 205 for that purpose. And so our consultants will review the current prices within our funding model for those components and compare it to what they come up with their price as cost-based. So yeah, they do account for that inflation as part of what they will review under our current funding model. But they will also ensure whatever price they come up with as part of their recommendations includes some look forward to the year in which this will be implemented. And I guess really this process will establish recommendations for the succeeding school year, which is school year 26-27. So whatever work that comes out of this process, that's kind of the target that they'll establish the prices for, which will account for any inflation between now and the next, or that school year for establishment of the model.
And just to follow up, then I'll get to Senator Olson here. Is it, just, I'm not sure again of the process since I haven't been involved with it, but is it a 5-year look back? I mean, do they take all the data from 5 years or just the most recent data? How does that work?
Madam Chair, they will look at what our current funding model is. So any modifications to the block grant in this session, but they will look at historical data, and we have robust data sets that they have looked at in the past. It doesn't limit them to 5 years. They've looked back to 10 years or 15 years in the past. But when they review their analysis, they're looking at best practices across the nation or literature. The other item, I guess we probably should have touched on too, is they will also look to the district court ruling under the current school finance litigation. And so and that's part of the desk audit charge. We haven't got a ruling yet, so that's not really been analyzed, but this committee and any consultant that is charged with the assistance of recalibration will look at those directives as well.
I think Senator Olson had a question for you. Go
Yes,
ahead.
thank you, Madam Chairman. Is so there's a carve out here specifically for virtual education and for charter schools, calling them out to be studied. Is that new to this recalibration, or is that common in recalibration?
Madam
Yes,
Chairwoman,
go ahead.
Senator, that was added by Management Council in response to public testimony. That is new. I would say your consultants would study that. Charter schools are
Anyway.
public schools.
Yeah.
They know, to Matt's point a few minutes ago, they know which issues are important to the Wyoming legislature, and they certainly would take a look at that at our request. Same thing with the virtual education. We know it's changed in the last 5 years in response to COVID. They did look at technology requirements in 2020. And so certainly, in the last 5 years, they would come to the table with any best practices. It's not necessary, but I think it gives those constituents a certain level of comfort with having that language in the bill draft.
Yeah, Madam Chairman.
Yes,
I just
follow-up?
thought it was really interesting because charter schools are funded by the exact same way as any traditional public school. So I think that's what you're saying, is they would be studied anyway. So it seems unnecessary to me, but do you recall what the testimony was that brought them to the desire to include this language?
Madam Chair and Senator Olson, on the virtual education, that was a specific constituent I think school district that has a virtual education program. They wanted that specific language in there. And this item has been studied independently of a recalibration by the legislature multiple times throughout my tenure. The charter school, I don't know if that was at the recommendation of the superintendent or of independent of management council. I can't recall that discussion directly.
That's fair. Thank you.
Senator, go ahead, Senator Scott.
Madam Chairman, further on that, particularly on the virtual schools, as we've dealt with it in the past 4 years on Education Committee, there have been continuous questions as to whether it was really being properly funded. And these things they have evolved some. Basically, they've learned how to do what they're doing. And there's some problems there. So I must say that provision makes sense to me.
And Madam Chair and
Let's go
Senator
ahead.
Olson and Senator Scott, just to give you a little bit of background on the virtual education programs currently in the state, those students are funded no differently than a brick and mortar student. Those students are required to be enrolled in a school that fits their grade band, that their grade configuration. They're required to take the statewide assessment, and they're funded within that student's or that school's average daily membership. So again, there's no distinction between a virtual education student or a brick and mortar student for purposes of funding. And so that has been the recommendation of our consultants in the past. And so it's always good, I guess, reevaluate those items. I don't know that having that language in here would preclude our consultants do that, or the committee to charge them with that either.
Anything else? Follow up? Go ahead, Senator Scott.
It may or may not really change things, because one thing we have found, and we've seen this in other professions, people think that doing things remotely is cheaper, and it really isn't. You need the same amount of personal attention to the students, whether it's in person or remote. It's just done a little differently.
Okay. Yeah, yes, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just have a drafting question. So the title of this bill has a 2 in it, but I don't recall a school finance model recalibration bill on the Senate side. I don't recall a mirror bill. Maybe I just missed it.
Go ahead, Ms.
Madam
Sytrek.
Chairwoman, Senator Olson, the prior management council also had a bill draft for the select recalibration, and they declined to sponsor that
Oh, okay.
and left that charge to the new incoming leadership. And so that's the explanation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for our experts? Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate your testimony. Anyone else who would like to, our Department of Ed, like to, okay. In that case, we'll just open it up to public for testimony. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Brian Farmer with Wyoming School Boards Association. Madam Chairman, this bill that's before you it's a good bill. Support this structure. The recalibration conversation is an important conversation that the state of Wyoming have every 5 years. And I think it's important to understand kind of what the Campbell cases say about recalibration. So at the very outset, the court says that it is up to the legislature to define the basket of goods. What is the education that we expect of Wyoming? So Campbell says your number one duty is to define the basket of goods. Your number two duty is to cost that. Once you've defined it, determine what does it cost to deliver that basket of goods, because that has to be a cost-based model. That's fundamental to the Campbell case. And then the number three duty of the legislature is to fund it. So those three components are what the court has said your duty is. And this bill does exactly that. This bill lays out something that is in accordance with your duties. Madam Chairman, the Wyoming legislature and this committee is very fortunate to have an excellent legislative service office staff. The folks that work with this are very competent, very good staff. I would encourage you to seek their advice as you contemplate the process. I think their history, their expertise are good and important to hear from them. Madam Chairman, Senator Olson did point out two pieces that I did want to bring to your attention, which is the bottom of page 2, the discussion of virtual schools, and the top of page 3, the discussion of charter schools. Whether a part of recalibration or not, I think are important to at least bring awareness to talk about, because they do look a little different from how our traditional brick and mortar other public schools operate. With the virtual school, the question is, what is the allocation of resource for the virtual student? Is it the same as a brick and mortar student, or do they need other resources in order to receive that basket of goods? And so there are a couple of programs based out of Wyoming school districts, and those programs, when you look at funding, does it make sense to use the same model, or are there models that are unique to those programs that need to be considered? And Madam Chairman, I do think that the same discussion is really important for charter schools. As we've been going through our conversations with charter schools and we're looking at them, one of the important questions that we've been talking about is, what is the LEA, the local educational authority, over those? And so just this session, you've looked at bills. Senator Brennan brought one about the allocation of resource to the charter school specifically in that area. What does that look like? And is that different for a state-authorized charter versus a district-authorized charter? When you're talking about the question of a centralized state agency, what they sometimes call the 49th district, that could potentially administer the state-authorized charters, versus having each one be its own entity, there are cost factors associated with that. The additions of more and more LEAs is one of the more expensive elements of the system. So we've talked before about things like consolidation. Is it cheaper to have fewer school districts? And now we're looking at adding additional LEAs, additional entities. And so what is the cost implication of that? Those are important pieces of recalibration, but making sure at the end of the day that the child, because in the Campbell case, it says that the child shall receive substantially the same education, whether she's in Laramie or Sundance. And so we want to make sure whether that child's in a virtual program, a charter program, or a traditional public school brick and mortar program, that the child is receiving that education that the legislature says that the child's entitled to. So this is a good process. This bill lays out a good process, and I would urge caution at any kind of radical change to what's here in this bill. It lays out a good process. The consultants have come out with recommendations before. It's not that the consultant is not capable of making recommendations. The question ultimately is whether the legislature wants to adopt those recommendations. So it's a process, and from the school district side, the piece that we've appreciated is that it's a deliberative process that involves stakeholders. And we've appreciated the opportunity to participate in that. Sometimes that means providing data, it means extra work, but that's an important piece of getting it right. And so we're willing to be partners in that process, and we look forward to being collaborators in the process. And we hope that all of the Education Committee takes advantage of the opportunity to kind of observe and monitor that process, whether they're part of the committee or not. It's a very important piece of our educational framework in Wyoming. So, Madam Chairman, I just encourage you to support this bill, to rely on the expertise of your Legislative Service Office, and certainly happy to be a partner in the process. Thank you, Madam
Questions for Mr. Farmer? I have just one, I just tap into, again, the virtual, and again, you may have been involved with this in the past, but do they treat those differently if they're standalone virtual schools versus those that, like I taught online classes through my district? So is there a difference the way the model would look at that, or you have any idea on that?
So, Madam Chairman, if it's a virtual school, such as the Wyoming Virtual Academy or the Connections program, those are a little different from a standalone class, a virtual offering. Madam Chairman, there's really a wide range of what a virtual education program can be. The history and the discussion of virtual programs has been longstanding. We've looked at the idea of what about accessing a marine biology class offered by some other entity somewhere else in the United States, to can we broadcast a class from one Wyoming school to another Wyoming school where that's not available. And so there are nuances and complexities based on whether we're talking the funding of a program, such as the independent schools, or other virtual offerings that are provided by school districts.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, thank you so
Thank you.
much for your testimony. Anyone else that would like to testify on this bill, please come forward. Welcome, happy Valentine's Day. You've got your hearts on, don't you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Carrie Klein with the Wyoming Association of Public Charter Schools, and I actually wasn't planning on saying anything today, but we seem to be coming up. So I was at the Management Council meeting when they did talk about recalibration, and I can't recall either how charters, if it was a specific or just part of the conversation. I do recall there was testimony on the virtual schools, but we didn't say anything as a charter movement. But, you know, happy to, and really appreciate the fact that charters are now being recognized as part of the overall public education system in Wyoming. And, you know, we really look forward to this conversation as well. And I'm excited to see if there are places in the model or things that we need to do that recognize that charters get equitable funding, but perhaps have, they look a little different and need some room to innovate. So if that comes up during the recalibration and as we look at these things, we're excited to be part of that conversation. So that's all I have, Madam Chairman.
Questions for Ms. Klein? Yeah, I have just one. Looking at, we're still fairly early in the charter school. I guess we've had some around for a bit, but then, just the expansion, we're still early in the deal. But looking at other states, funding-wise, their models, are they similar to what we're doing? Do you have any idea, or have you done any research on that?
Madam Chairman, I would say overall, we're fairly consistent with how charters are funded in other states. There are some differences in how other states fund facilities, but that difference is also equated through their public school, the traditional models as well. I think one of the areas that Wyoming is unique is in how we do our facilities just overall. So that's probably the biggest part that I see. Other than that, it's I think we do a really good job in Wyoming of having that equity, we're at 100% ADM. There are many other states that their charters fight for equitable funding. So appreciate that we've been recognized and funded as such.
Other questions? Okay, thanks for your time. Appreciate your testimony. Anyone else that would like to testify on this bill? All right, we have a couple online, but I think they might be for the next bill. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Okay, all right. Well, with that, we'll go ahead then and close down public testimony. Committee, what's your thoughts on this bill?
Move the bill.
Move the bill by Senator Brennan. Discussion. Any potential amendments? I think
Madam Chairman.
Senator Scott may have one.
Yes, I want to propose one, and there's a couple of things I'm trying to achieve in this amendment. Madam Chairman, one of the things that has become apparent in dealing with the external cost adjustment issue over the years is that there is a degree of confusion that comes as to when the data is gathered and does it actually reflect what's going on. And so one of the things I'm looking for is establishing an as-of date for the data so that we have, okay, this was based on what was available and reflected in a certain date. And now there's been, I understand in the recalibration, there's been some, we collect the data and then we put an inflation factor to reach the end of the school year. What I'm seeking to do would essentially say, let the legislature do that. Because, Madam Chairman, one of the things I think is real important is in the current system, the legislature really can't control the total level of expenditure, because to do something to it, you have to go into the model, which none of us have the expertise to do. So we can, I think, control how much should be allowed as an inflation factor, because members can look at what's going on in their own school district and judge, are they well-funded? Are they not well-funded? Do they need something are they struggling because of inflation and need an increase? And what I envision is you'll have an as-of date that will be sometime in the fairly recent past, depending on when the consultants say they can get the data, what they're basing their estimates on. And instead of them estimating the inflation, this would have the legislature do it. That's the point of the single eye. And I would say all of these, we're really giving the recalibration committee some general principles, and they're gonna have to work out the details. But one of them is let's have a firm date, and then let's let us figure out how much inflation really is needed. The second item, changes in the funding need to reflect changes in the costs, may be established to multiply total funding provided by the block by a percentage established by law. So that'll give us an easier way, rather than go back and adjust the funding model, because it is a block grant, that the funding that's actually going to govern ought to be as a percentage of that block grant, rather than adjusting individual things, because the districts, that reflects how the districts will not necessarily adjust the individual things we grant for. They will adjust their whole, it's a block grant, and they'll use it where they choose to. So we ought to fund it that way. And the third item is really trying to tie the total expenditure to the appropriation. And as I understand, there'll be a complication that'll have to be worked out as to how do you handle the recapture districts if you do that, so that you don't get the wealth-based disparities the court really dislikes. But that's what this does. It gives the recalibration committee a push in the direction of let's get control over the spending again through the appropriation process, through the inflation adjustment process, and give us control back to the legislature as a whole, Madam Chairman. So, Madam Chairman, I move the amendment, and that's what it does.
Discussion on that amendment. I have one just on the second part. Are those, the multiplying, you've got multiplying the total funding provided by the Education Resource Block Grant Model by percentage established by law. So that is in statute?
No, this would, I would see them putting it in the statute.
I see.
When they do the
I
recalibration,
see.
because they'll have to adjust the details to get it right.
Okay.
This
Madam-
pushes them that way. It's not in the statute now.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Wilmar.
Madam Chairman, I tend to hesitate to insert myself during your guys' debates of amendments, but
I was
there's
gonna
already,
ask you back anyway.
okay.
To help us out on this
Yeah,
amendment, so.
there is
feel free.
already a process established in law for you to evaluate external cost adjustments. That's contained in 2113-309, subsections O and U. Those statutes conflict with this, this proposed amendment. Secondly, your consultants, as part of the recalibration process, provides recommendations on your external cost adjustment process, what cost indices should be used to evaluate inflation. You all have the prerogative to reject those cost indices and choose whatever inflationary method you want to use. But as part of your recalibration process, you do have that as part of one of the components to study, and they offer those recommendations. And you do that in years between recalibration. Those statutes I cited, that's the process where you monitor and evaluate inflation in years between recalibration. And it's then your charge to ensure that your model remains cost-based in years between a recalibration effort. And so inserting a subsection in 3 subsequent paragraphs to charge your select committee, I don't know how this, I think one conflicts with your current statutory process, but you're in that first paragraph, your consultants and your committee will sponsor legislation to establish prices for the school year 26-27 school year. And so I don't know if that's necessarily needed. In paragraph 2, you already have a process that's laid out that, and you can change that process during the recalibration effort. If you don't want to continue to monitor in the way you want, or utilize the cost indices or process, that's a policy choice for the legislature to make as part of the recalibration. And you actually modified your process in the 2010 recalibration. You used to just apply a single inflationary factor to the entire model. Well, you as part of that, you as a legislature, as part of that process, broke the model down into 4 separate components. You wanted to focus on professional staff, non-professional staff, utilities or energy components, and then materials components, because they all don't move at the same rate of inflation. And so the legislature wanted to precise those inflationary factors and evaluate those costs differently. So paragraph 2, you already have a process laid out. And then paragraph 3, I think Senator Scott alluded to, this probably needs a little bit of massaging. But again, the recapture districts receive all of their block grant dollars through their local revenue wealth. And they're not beholden to any appropriation from the legislature. They're receiving their foundation program amount through the formula from all their local revenue wealth. And so whatever appropriation the legislature establishes doesn't really necessarily come into affect them. And so there is some, if this is enacted, you're going to have quite a few equity issues across the state. So sorry to belabor the comments here, but I just wanted to lay out some of those cautions.
Yes, go ahead, Senator Scott, question?
Yes, in response to that, part of what I'm trying to do is I don't think the current inflation adjustment system works very well. Because it requires us to, as members, go mess with the details in the block grant that we don't understand, whereas I think we do understand how good the funding job is in total for our districts.
Other comments?
It would, if they follow this, they would need to go back and look at those other statutes and change them.
So, Mr. Wilmarth, basically you're saying that at least paragraph 2 is probably in violation of what we're, not in violation, conflict, I guess is the word, of what we are already doing. Paragraph 1 and 3, what are your thoughts on 3? You say it'll kind of maybe tip a little issues with recalibration, or excuse me, with recapture districts and equity.
Yeah, Madam
Explain that
Chairman.
just a little bit better.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, paragraph 1, I don't think is necessary in that the charge of your consultants in your committee is to establish prices for each component of the model for the succeeding school year once your recalibration is finished. So just thinking of a timeline, this committee will work all interim. It'll sponsor hopefully legislation for the 2026 budget session that would then be enacted for the 26-27 school year. And whatever legislation is established for the model or the recalibration effort, those prices should reflect whatever is appropriate for the 2026-27 school year. That is your as of date. So that charge is already met with the process that you undertake. Paragraph 2 conflicts with your current process of evaluating inflationary pressures in between years of recalibration. You already have a process established for evaluating inflation and recommending external cost adjustments. If you want to modify that through the recalibration process, that's a policy choice of the select committee and the legislature. I don't think you need to, and your consultants are already, again, charged with recommending, hey, if you, in years between recalibration, once we establish this price, here's our best recommendation on what cost indice to use. You can ignore those cost indices, and you have in the past, but you can certainly reevaluate what process you want to do that, and that's already laid out in statute. That's the area where you want to amend the statutes. And then paragraph 3, I just think is, as written, is unworkable in that, again, recapture districts don't receive an appropriation for their foundation program amount. That's funded through their local revenues. And so reducing it or not exceed the available appropriation isn't applicable to them. And then you set up some equity issues where entitlement school districts are going to have some arbitrary appropriation reduction, or they're going to be beholden to an appropriation. And there's already a process laid out in statute for the state superintendent to make a pro rata reduction in the instance that there is insufficient funds available in the public school foundation program account. I don't know that that is necessarily, again, necessary, but happy to address any more questions.
Okay, thank you. That does clarify it for me anyway. So other comments on the amendment? Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. You know, I appreciate the discussion, but one other concern I have is that the amendment presupposes decisions and binds the select committee unnecessarily. I mean, all of these issues that I think are in the amendment to be contemplated would be best contemplated by the select committee itself through the process instead of being predefined to agree with these principles. And I think you know, having served on this committee a few times in the past, you go into it, you listen, you learn, you figure out what's the best approach, you put forward recommendations. And from my experience, it seems like it would have been unfortunate if we went into the process being told how we needed to come out of the process instead of having the select committee free to make that decision. So I don't see advantage to any of the 3 points relative to just letting the committee think for itself, act for itself. It's the body that's going to be working the process.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, let's go ahead and take a vote on this amendment. All those in favor of Senator Scott's amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No? No? All right, that amendment will not be added. Are there other amendments or other changes?
Madam Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I do have an amendment. I would like to move to remove the charter school language from the study. So that would be page 2, line 23, after predictable, strike further, and then remainder of the line. And then on page 3, strike lines 1, 2, and 3 up to predictable. Predictable to predictable.
Okay,
And Madam Chairman, if I may,
yes, go ahead.
the logic here is that I don't know enough about the virtual education program to argue whether it should be in here or not. But as for charter schools, they are publicly funded. They are publicly funded wholly. They are funded from the block grant, the same as all other schools. I really don't see a need to study them independently. And what other states do is irrelevant because it's a public school. It should be treated the same as all schools inside the block grant. So I really think that we would be spending time on this committee. I think they'd be wasting time, honestly. So I really think it should all be studied the same. And I don't know about virtual schools, but anyway, that's my amendment.
Okay, discussion? Senator Rothfuss?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it gets looked at whether it's in or out, and I'm not averse to taking it out. I don't think it ends up doing very much, but I do think that there are some concerns that we haven't walked through on the funding, because with charter schools, particularly the state authorized charter schools, you have an inequity based on how we're funding them as school district schools when they don't actually have the district support mechanism in place. And I think it actually does need a look to give thought to, are we adequately funding their resources, recognizing that they're not participating in the district? It's almost like they're a district of one type concept. And so then you look at small districts and how we fund small districts, and that might be a more equitable model. At the same time, and maybe this is something for this committee instead of for the recalibration committee, the discussion of creating a District 49 so that we actually have the administration to properly manage charter schools, that needs to take place. And maybe taking it out of here lets this committee do that during the interim, which might be more appropriate. So I'm fine with the concept, but I do really think it needs to be thought through, and it does fold into recalibration in many ways. So I wanted to comment on that. And then just to comment on the virtual education funding models. Yeah, we've got a bit of a disaster of a process there, I think. We haven't done a bang-up job. We've tried about 3 times through the Education Committee. We didn't tackle it very much in any of the recalibrations, but it creates some funding awkwardness where ADMs go to certain districts that have the virtual education and are accounted for in rather strange ways. It doesn't translate directly to the same teachers. So we don't have a model that appropriately handles virtual education. So leaving that in is probably a good idea. We should, unless we want to take that on as the Education Committee during the interim, somebody should take a look at it, and recal is just fine. So those are my thoughts, and I'm honestly pretty ambivalent as to whether we leave in or take out the charter school. I think it'll get looked at, but I think this committee probably should look at the District 49 concept during the interim.
Other comments? Yes, go ahead. Senator Brennan?
Thanks, Madam Chairwoman. I would be okay taking this language out, and then I agree with Senator Scott that I actually think it would be a great interim topic for this committee to look at the charter schools and making them a 49th district, and I think we're set up well to do that on this committee, and then look at the whole of funding public schools within the recalibration. I'm in favor of that.
Okay. Senator Scott, did you have a comment?
Yes, Madam Chairman. I kind of think maybe we ought to leave the charter schools in and have them looked at. When they came to us at first in the most recent effort, there was a good deal of talk about how much cheaper they were going to be, and it doesn't seem to be working out, Madam Chairman. I don't understand what's going on. I think maybe having them looked at is a good idea.
Okay. I'm kind of with you, Senator Scott. I can see both sides of it. I'm a little bit like Senator Alphys, kind of, can go either side of the fence on this. I don't want it to be, off the table, and I know they're not, because they are part of our public school systems, but I would like to see us kind of keep them under the microscope too, make sure we're doing things right. So let's go ahead and take a vote on it then. All those in favor of Senator Olson's amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No? All right, that amendment is passed. We will take that out. Any other amendments? Okay. No other discussion? Let's go ahead and take roll then, Ashley.
Madam Chairman, on House Bill 316, do pass as amended, Senator Brennan,
Aye.
Senator Olson. Aye. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Scott.
Aye.
Chairwoman Schuler.
Aye.
That is 5 ayes.
Okay, thank you very much. That bill's passed. Who wants to take it up on the floor? Thank you again, you guys, for being here. Appreciate it.
Madam Chair, just a reminder, this has an appropriation, so it'll be re-referred to the Appropriations Committee,
Okay.
so we'll be there as well.
Okay, appreciate that. All right, thank you so much. Our next bill for consideration is, let me find it. Here we go, House Bill 17, Career Technical Education Equipment Grants Amendments. This was sponsored by the Education Interim Committee, but I don't know, Department of Ed, you guys want to talk a little bit about this? Take it off first thing and give us the high-level view? Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Wanda Maloney, and I'm the Chief Policy Officer at the department. And I'm supporting the superintendent, and she certainly does support career and technical education. It's been part of her strategic plan. As we look at this bill really does support the Career and Technical Education Equipment Grant. We have 2 grants that are provided. One is the demonstration grant. This is the equipment. If you look at the wording, you'll notice on page 2, line 1, it would change the amount allocated from $50,000 to $75,000. And then following on page 2, on line 20, instead of having lookbacks for districts in being eligible, it would move that from being 5 years to 2 years. This doesn't change the amount of funding. We currently receive about $500,000 overall for the funding for career and technical education in relation to this grant, but it would change the amount that districts would have access to when they applied from that $50,000 to $75,000. One of the things that we've noticed too as a district, when we do receive those grants from districts, we do have requests, of course, that meet that allotment, but the amount of equipment in terms of a lathe, a wood lathe, things like that, that come through for request are around the amount of $85,000 or $100,000. So these pieces of equipment continue to rise and are expensive for districts.
Questions for Ms. Maloney? I had one when I first started looking at the bill, and I guess it makes total sense, but on page 2, where it talks about the awards given to districts, they have to have expended or will expend with the award, the grant request in that section. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So each district does have an allotted amount. So we ask for an assurance that they have to use their CTE funding. That's that 1.29 allocated funding for equipment that is spent. And they have to, our look back goes to the 5 years. So we want to make sure that those equipment expenses are utilized by the district. And there are a number of other things. We also look and make sure that there is a second preference that we give is to districts that have not received a grant like this previously. In the statute, it also requests that those districts submit a proposal of the need for the relationship to workforce. It also asks for the purpose, a plan, and a timeline, and then also an assurance that they have facilities to support that need. So there are a number of requirements that districts have to align this request for.
Okay. That's helpful, thank you. Questions? Yes, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the 5 years to 2 years and some of the problems challenges we were having with the 5 years? I remember some of the discussion, but I don't know that everyone remembers.
Ms. Maloney?
Madam Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, you know, I think districts do their best to allocate money and look for the needs, and as they're building programs, and we know programs of study, they're continually updating those according to their local needs assessments. And 5 years is a long time for a look back. And so we wanted to just be more efficient and use a 2-year look back with that.
Other questions? Senator Scott?
Madam Chairman, this bill, as I remember it from the interim, it was focused in good part on the change from 50 to 75,000 simply because there's been inflation. Is there another interim bill in this area coming, or is there another bill coming over from the House in this particular area?
Ms. Maloney, do you know that information?
Madam Chair, Senator Scott, I believe there is another bill that's coming forward in relation to CTE, but it's in terms of a categorical grant for equipment and supplies.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Anyone else that would like to testify on this bill, please come forward. Welcome, happy Valentine's Day.
Hi, good morning. Happy Valentine's Day, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Jessie Defoe, and I'm with the Wyoming Association for Career and Technical Education. I just want to thank the interim committee for looking at CTE. As you guys are well aware of, I mean, CTE is something that's thankfully been front and center because 60% of our open jobs currently are CTE related. And our future and our workforce are worth investing in and looking at. We appreciate House Bill 17. It's one of those where with the interim, it started off as a much larger bill looking at all the grants. Should we streamline them, put them all in one? And this is what you have before you today as kind of the compromise of all that and hopefully something we continue to look at. You've hit on the two key factors. One is to increase the level of funding without changing the amount allotted within that grant so that, as the department alluded to, the cost of everything is rising. So how do we do that? The second part, I think, is really important to frame future conversations that we are about to have in terms of the 2 to 5 year look back. Because right now, and this is where, we can call back on the department to double check numbers and make sure that if you want to know exact numbers, or even as the conversation continues, but right now, maybe 5 school districts, honestly, less than 5 school districts are probably available for this. I was here when we created this first grant, and the approach was to create a carrot instead of a stick to incentivize that 29% being spent. So basically, the way that the CTE model is set out right now, you have 3 buckets. You have your salary and your FTEs, you have your grants, which we're talking about this grant right now, and then you have your 29%. And so we're encouraging districts to spend that 29%. Right now, that's just not happening. Right now, it's maybe 55 to 60% of that. We have students spending money out of their own pocket to meet industry standards. And so we're trying to encourage and work with school districts. As we know, each school district has different demands, and we know that they need to meet those. But at the same time, we also know that these programs needs need to be met as well. So we're hoping that maybe as we continue to move forward, and with the 2-year, knowing a shorter amount of time and turnover of districts, maybe more schools could be eligible for this because we know the need is there. So we're trying to help them find ways to best invest in their CTE programs. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but would appreciate your support on this bill today.
Questions for Ms. Defoe? I have just a couple. I'm kind of wondering if, again, I don't know the background on why the 5-year versus the 2, but it makes sense what you're describing. Do you think a lot of districts maybe were just keeping money in reserve, waiting around to buy the big equipment, and so maybe that's why they hadn't expended the money that they should have? That'd be my first question.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, that's a great question. And in fact, we want school districts to have the opportunity to do that, because right now with their 29% money, it could be under 10,000 that they generate up to, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So especially for those small school districts, they need the capability to hold on to money sometimes year over year. And so originally, that's why 5 years was looked at. However, and I can send you some graphs, unfortunately, we don't see that happening. You look over the past 10 years, you would see spikes. You don't see spikes in terms of where that's being spent. And that's also part of the reason why there's 2 different grants currently available through the Department of Education. There's this grant for supplies, materials, and equipment, and then there's also another innovative grant. So if they're setting up a new program and partnering with a community college and doing things like that, there's another grant set aside for that. So there are opportunities to still do that, and I think that as we continue to look at the overall funding, that's something to be taken into consideration. But right now, even the current legislation still coming to you would allow for that opportunity if needed.
And just as a follow-up, I have no idea how much some of this equipment costs. Is $75,000? What can we buy with that?
Yeah.
If you've got some ideas in the shop area, or welding, or wood shop, I don't know.
Yep, and I think, Madam Chairman, the example that the department just gave is a great example. Honestly, just even consumables, buying 2x4s are going up. We have lots of really great innovative ag and greenhouse things happening. It's not going to fund an entire project, but it could get a lot done, and it's still a worthy amount to invest in a school district.
Good. Any other questions for Ms. Defoe? Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Anyone else like to testify today on this bill? Looks like we have another couple of victims. Welcome. Happy Valentine's Day.
Thank
You're
you,
wearing
Madam
red
Chairwoman.
today.
Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, my name is Kelly Little. I'm with the Associated General Contractors of Wyoming. We support this bill, and we are asking you all to support it as well. We think that as one of the main industries that benefits from an educated and skilled workforce that comes out of these CTE programs, flexibility that's provided in this bill is of utmost importance. You've heard the department and Ms. Defoe talk about the cost of equipment. It is substantial, and it's something that the training with that equipment really benefits the student in being prepared to come into a career in a career and technical education position. So we just hope that you can support the bill, and anything that allows flexibility at the K-12 level to really holistically grow that workforce here in Wyoming is something that we support. And with that, I'll take questions.
Questions for Ms. Little? Okay, thank you so much. Welcome. Happy Valentine's Day to the guys, too, you know, you have to say that.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you so much. Rennie McKay, President of the Wyoming Business Alliance. And because I think we'll spend a little time talking about career technical education over the next week or so, I'll give you my preamble on this issue. So the Business Alliance is private sector. We represent businesses from all industries, from all corners of the states and all sizes. And I've been in the job about a year now. And as I talk to those members, the biggest challenge they face right now is a lack of workforce and a lack of talent. And we've looked at some data across the state. We're at a position right now where there's about 6,000 vacant jobs. So companies have created jobs, posted them, and they can't find people. And then when you look at our demographics, we have a situation where if you look at everyone who's working today, plus everyone who's unemployed, there's still about 6,000 to 7,000 jobs out there. So when you look at the number of people who are working today, we're not quite at the peak in Wyoming's history. But if you look at the number of jobs that are available in Wyoming, we're at the peak in the state's history. So it's a really unique time. And why this is relevant is so many of those positions that are vacant could benefit from even a high school graduate with CTE skills, or especially then if you offer advanced certification through the colleges. So this is so important to the ability for Wyoming businesses to stay strong and stay, to continue to grow. I think the example I use is knowing folks from the construction industry, they won't bid on jobs right now because they don't have the workforce to do the job if they got it. So they're passing up the bid. So we're losing competition if it's private sector or public sector. They're not bidding on those jobs. So then the cost goes up of that job for the either private sector or public sector. So this is just so important. And so that's the preamble. And just really appreciate that you've started here with this bill. I think it's a good step in the right direction. I'll compliment my colleague Kelly and her organization. I know they were in Campbell County last weekend to celebrate, and they took a check up to that school district to help buy supplies. So the private sector is putting a lot of money in to try to help, but that is because you've got so many districts that aren't eligible for the grants right now, that they're constrained. So just appreciate you looking at career technical education today and next week, and I'll be back.
Questions for Mr. McKay? No, appreciate all you guys do. Like I said, it's an area that I have a real strong focus on. I just think we have not done all that we need to do to try to get kids in that lane. And so the more that we can provide resources and support, I think that's what's going to make the difference. Having those-
Madam Chairwoman, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
I just, Mr. McKay did remind me of that, we do have the private sector, and particularly our organization, does have a very robust workforce development program. We go into schools, we present, we have events, workday events, we do a big event in Casper where kids can come out and try out driving the machinery and testing those things out. So to really try to get students excited for jobs in these fields. So, we're hoping that, being a partner with the state and being a partner with the legislature can really synergize and grow these programs, so.
Well, we appreciate all that you do, both of you. So, questions? Thanks so much for your testimony. We'll probably see you around next week. Yeah, same to you. All right, anybody else that would like to testify? Welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association, speaking in favor of the bill. Madam Chairman, I think the discussion today probably highlights that this would actually be a great interim topic for this committee. Earlier this year, I was in Arlington, Texas. It's a district of about 59,000 kids, and I went to a career technical center that was beyond amazing. They had a fire academy, they had a police academy, they had health and career areas where kids did phlebotomy and EKGs and kinesiology. They had culinary programs. They had absolutely amazing things. And I think sometimes when we hear CTE, we think about wood shop, metal shop, welding, maybe ag. And CTE is much bigger than that. Career technical education, I think if we think about what could it do for Wyoming, and you think about discussions we've had about lack of emergency medical services in some communities, what could we do for that? I think there are huge areas of potential exploration. But one of the big things we have to keep in mind is that courses, no matter what the courses are primarily driven by student interest. What classes do the kids want to take? And so are we providing those opportunities for what kids want to do? And welding, Madam Chairman, leads to a wonderful career. That's something that kiddos could take. They're not going to become prepared to be a welder in high school welding. They're going to get a good foundation that's going to take them on to the next thing. So looking at those partnerships from high school to community college to workforce are looking at the total preparation of the student. But if you're looking at plasma cutters, $75,000 doesn't even sneeze at that. This bill specifically is looking at an inflationary adjustment. And it's also, with the look back, I will say that when we report data, we usually report data for what we're told to report data at the time. And as time has changed, the expectations of the data and the expectations of what's reported have also changed. And so what we were recording 5 years ago is not the same as what we're recording today. Today's data is more robust and more appropriate and more clear as to what is actually being done for kiddos. So this bill does two tiny things, but it sets the stage for a bigger discussion. And I think it will be an important one for us to continue to have. So, in support of the bill.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Farmer? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Anyone else in the room that would like to testify? Okay, I think we have somebody online. Oh, sorry, do you have a question?
I just had a question for the department, maybe.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know, I don't recall the history of this, but I'm assuming that there is an account in the Department of Education that these grants come out of. And I don't know if it was mentioned, but I'm just curious what the balance of that account is.
Ms. Maloney, if you have that information, we'd love to hear it.
Madam Chairman, as Senator Olson, I don't have the balance of that account, but I'd be happy to get that for you. But we do have a team that oversees that information, and we would have that for you.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, that's perfect.
Okay,
That'll work.
thank you so much, appreciate that. Any other questions for the department while they're here? Okay, thanks again. All right, I believe we have at least one person online, maybe two.
Yes, Madam Chairman, as you can see, Kelly Carpenter is ready to go.
Okay, welcome, Ms. Carpenter. Please tell us what you'd like us to know about this bill.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Committee. Kelly Carpenter with the Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Thanks for the opportunity to join you virtually today. Our membership firmly supports the bill. We support and appreciate efforts like this to bolster career technical education, to help the youth getting into the trades. To echo previous comments, jobs in the trade are in high demand and are critical for all of our communities across Wyoming and are necessary to support the agricultural industry. Also, we support this bill because we believe it'll help our kids in our state remain in our state and is a good return on our investment to keep them here employed in good paying jobs. So thank you again for the opportunity, and I'll take any questions you or the committee may have.
Questions for Ms. Carpenter? Thank you for being here. I'm glad that you brought up the ag end of it, because I think sometimes we forget about our ag folks, and a lot of those kids that I had in high school that came from ranch and farm families generally would try to get into some of our CTE classes, but I think it's important that we try and expand that to kids that necessarily don't grow up on a ranch or farm, that they might want to get into the same classes. So appreciate, your support. And
Yes,
thanks for
ma'am.
your
Thank you,
testimony.
Madam Chairwoman. Thank you.
Yep, thanks so much. Anyone else online?
No, Madam Chairman.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and close public testimony. What would you like to do with this bill, committee? Move the bill. It's been moved by the good senator from Cheyenne. Any changes or amendments or discussion on the bill? It's one of those that we call a simple little bill, but sometimes those simple little bills sometimes get real complicated. I see no potential for amendments or changes, so if there's no other discussion, let's go ahead and take roll.
Madam Chairman, on House Bill 17, Career Technical Education Equipment Grants Amendments do pass. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Olson?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss? Senator Scott? Chairwoman Schuler?
Aye.
5 ayes.
Okay, thank you. That bill is passed. Would anybody want to volunteer to take this on the floor? One of you guys that have been in, on the Education Committee, or if not, I will, but. Okay, I'll let you two decide. You can do rock, paper, scissors. Oh, okay. She's gonna defer to you. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks for your testimony. Have a great Valentine's Day. Do something fun. Take the wives or husbands out. Have them take you out. There you go.
Have them take you out.
Yes.